What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Today I bring you all What If Xehther was in My Hero Academia, the birthday special edition, cause it's my birthday. So leave a like or you're evil, cause that's just the birthday rules. I don't make the rules, I just follow them. Anyways, so this video, I'm not gonna lie, it took me a while to make this video since it's a remastered version of an old video I made back when I was at 10k subs. And just a quick disclaimer, if you're looking at the screen right now, there will be tons of art made by Ikari on Instagram. Go check her link out in the description and pay close attention to the art because it will be making tons of sense later on in the video, and I will be referencing this art a lot. So yeah, pay attention. Anywho, there will also be a lovely guest joining me today, but I won't spoil it. So strap in, get your snacks, and enjoy What If Xehther was in My Hero Academia.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Okay, so this story actually starts when Xehther's born. Now, he'd be born quirkless, which is a little bit of a secret that he won't be knowing until he's 4. And obviously, since he doesn't know it, he would grow up relatively the same as any other kid. I mean, he has 2 loving parents and a pretty relatively normal life. Everything about him would be average, except for one thing. His family would be very, very poor, and his parents' name would be Gabriel and Lucy. His father was an orphan child, and his mother was actually abandoned when she found out that she was going to be having Xehther. Afterwards, she was let go of, and she had to fend for herself with Gabriel. They've been struggling ever since. And the one good thing about it is that Xehther was born with, well, a loving family. A family that you would think has no problems, but internally, they actually have a lot. Problems that Xehther was completely unaware of due to the fact that 2 good parents are never going to let their son know that. Eventually the day would come when, after working a couple extra shifts, Lucy was finally able to ask Hisashi if they'd be willing to take Xehther to the Quirk Doctor. And Gabriel would say sure, they should take him. After all, he hasn't developed his quirk yet. They'd be worried considering that, honestly, they're kind of banking on Xehther to become a pro hero in the future and have some sort of miraculous quirk which can save their lives and give them everything they've ever wanted. They just have to kind of invest on him and bank on that. And eventually, they make their way to the Quirk Doctor. Once there, Xehther's family would be greeted by the man, and afterwards he would take them inside, saying that he has good news and bad news. He would say the bad news is that Xehther was actually born quirkless, and that he is a very rare individual. But that's the good news. Him being rare means that he has the ability to give them an offer. Looking on his charts, you can see that they're actually struggling quite a bit. He realizes the amount of money that they bring in every month doesn't actually correlate to the amount of jobs that they have to work in hours. He asked them how they've been doing financially and if it was hard to even get this appointment. Gabriel would sigh and say, "It was, but what about it? You said you can help us some way, right?" And the doctor would say, "See, an organization known as the X-Force is actually looking to create super soldiers, and we're looking for quirkless people to test on, seeing as anyone with a quirk always resulted in, well, a failure. They think they're better than everybody else, and they think that because of that they get easy access. But we think that making quirkless people stand out is something that we should do. Quirkless people are only 3% among the world, so finding somebody that is quirkless is extremely rare. So this is an opportunity for you guys. You guys could become millionaires overnight. And I am only going to ask you this once. Simple question. You can say yes or no, but it's up to you. Would you be willing to give custody over to this organization that is trying to train quirkless kids into being soldiers from a young age?" And he would explain that they'd be paid instantly. A fortune of $10 million without tax. Not only that, but he would go on to explain that Xehther's going to be having the best life ever. He's going to be trained by professionals. He's going to be having the best schooling, and his chances of becoming a pro hero would go through the roof, even higher than any other normal pro hero kid in any other pro hero has ever had. They hear all this and they hear all the good stuff, and Inko would be hesitant, but Hisashi, he thinks about it and says that maybe Izuku would have a better life if he wasn't as poor as they are. Plus, this would help them out a lot. And but Lucy would at first be extremely hesitant. She says, I can't just give up my son. What'll I have then? I lost my family already, and all I'll have is Gabriel. But he looks at her and says, listen, Inko, I know personally firsthand how hard it is to grow up without a family, but it sounds like this would be our ticket to a good life. We wouldn't have to wait for him to become a hero, and we would finally get everything we've wanted. No more struggling. And from what it sounds like, he'd live an even better life with them than he would have with us. I say we do it. And she looks at him and says, money isn't everything. We may be poor and we may be struggling, but money just won't buy happiness, would it? But Gabriel would say, think about it. Think about it well and strong. He'd grow up big and strong and he'd have access to anything he wants. I mean, if he was to grow up with us, then he'll be bullied or something and cast aside for being quirkless. I mean, we've seen some quirkless people on the street because they were treated so terribly. If anything, this would be saving his life, setting him up for the future in a better way than we ever could. Let's sign these papers. It's the best choice for all of us. Lucy would look at him and look down before then saying she'll do it. And from here, the doctor would bring some documents out. As they would sign the papers, and immediately, a man would take them to another room where they would sign some more papers and ultimately be given $10 million immediately transferred to both their accounts, split $5 million each. After that, Xehther would be taken by a tall man who would look at him and say, kid, I hope you're ready. His name is Gambit. And from here, Xehther would be taken from his family in America to a Japanese facility. Next, he would spend a couple of years being taught Japanese and trained in basic combat from a young age along with 12 other kids. They'd be chained to the brink day in and day out, and every single day felt like torture. It was terribly difficult, but Xehther stayed optimistic and looked at this like an opportunity. His first couple of months were terrible, but finally, the realization hit him that this is absolutely not going to be fun and games. One day he ends up finding out that the organization that they're working for has almost a 0% survivability rate. And the only other person who has actually survived this was a person by the name of Lady Nagan. Apparently she's the only successful subject, but that was such a long time ago and she was a weaker super soldier, so what's the point of even that? The formula they're trying to eject them with when they finally turn 14 is extremely dangerous, and they're not sure if any of them will even survive. He realizes that things aren't fun and games, and from the morning to the nighttime, he would train every single day. The food that he would gain access to is terrible. The people that he would be around were all just as scared as him. He'd be tired on most days, and he'd be filled with so many antibiotics to basically give him the ability to continue every single day. And by that, I mean drugs, right? And he'd be trained day in and day out. Eventually, he would gain a close relationship with many of the people that were there with him, and Xehther would realize that doing this is pretty much the only way that he's going to survive. One of those kids who was there, who would have refused to train, would have ultimately ended up having the serum injected into him sooner and prematurely died in front of all of them. A bit of a public execution, just trying to show them that if they try to stand up to them or fight back, they'll be taken care of. And that they were. From here, all of them would train as hard as they possibly could, and it would only be 12 people there. Eventually, time would come and Xehther, after training for years and years and years, would develop an amazing relationship with the people there. One person specifically who had grown to be somewhat of a father to him would be somebody by the name of Gambit, the same man who took him in the very same day Xehther was given over. And eventually, after years, all of them actually started to excel in all forms of combat. But the things that Xehther was mostly very, very capable of was combat with weapons and physical combat. The other ones were a bit more smarter than him. Some of them were more tactically sound. Some of them had better hand-to-hand combat, and only one of them was better at him at being a marksman. But Xehther was more well-rounded than all of them. He had a lot of forms of combat, and he realized halfway through the time that he was there that if he wants to survive If he wants to be strong, then that's what he's going to have to do. Just survive day in and day out, because that's all it is. It's survival of the fittest there. And so he trained with a passion and fire in his eyes, training to become stronger and stronger and stronger, and wanting to be the one who would finally survive the serum that they're going to be injected with. The training would be a lot harder, and eventually it became easier. Things were a lot easier until they weren't. Once they ended up realizing that the students were progressing rapidly fast, they ended up upping their training. And eventually, it became so incredibly difficult that many of them would even consider quitting at some point. But it never happened. They weren't allowed to, obviously. So they continued all of this. And by the age of 14, he would now be a master marksman with all forms of combat, martial arts, and be a trained assassin. He could straight up take out many people and they wouldn't even know it. By the time that they realized it, they'd already be dead. And he has so many forms of martial arts, ranging from deadly to simple and less harmful techniques. He started to make a bunch of friends, like I said earlier. And the one that he was most closest to was a boy by the name of Logan, who was the strongest one there. He was a hard-headed and powerful young boy who basically made Xehther feel like there was light at the end of the tunnel. He thought that if he never survived, at least Logan would, or at least that's how he felt. He always seemed so big and strong and powerful. He seemed like nothing could ever beat him, but things changed one day. And eventually, the day would come when they would all be injected with the super soldier serum. Finally, when it would happen, they would all end up being cuffed up and taken into a room where each and every single one of them would go into these test subjects one by one. And eventually, they would all begin to be strapped up. First 5, then another 4, and then another 5, 4, and then the last 3. And what would end up happening is that Logan would actually be one of the first ones to actually be injected with the super soldier serum. Logan would look at him and say that he's going to be fine. Trust him. He winks at him and then he gets down on the strap. The straps would go on Logan and he would simply smile at all of them, saying good luck. And all of them would immediately be injected with a green serum. From here, all of them would stop, and then immediately their bodies would just start convulsing, as suddenly black liquid would begin coming out of their mouths and eyes, and they would perish right in front of them. It would be a terrifying thing to watch happen. All these kids would essentially be injected with the super serum, and there's never been any survivors. The lie that they told them such a long time ago was that there has been, but that's a lie. Lady Nagant was never injected with that serum. She was simply trained, never actually given it. She was so precious to them with her quirk that they thought that injecting her with that and risking that would have been a lost cause, so they stood away from that. And eventually, what would end up finally happening is that all the kids would die. The last one would finally be Xehther, and he would be terrified. He looks at the body of Logan and he sees just the death, the lifelessness. After that, Xehther would try to break free and scream, "No, I don't want to die. Let me go!" But nothing. Xehther was in handcuffs and he just couldn't fight back. Eventually, Gambit would jump on him and say, "Calm down. I know that it's hard to do this, but you have to. It's for the good of our country. Now, sit." As he shoves them onto the chair, they would get him strapped up, and Xehther would look at all of them with fear in his eyes like never before. After all this time, they'd grown close, and Gambit would even have a couple of tears coming out of his eyes, but he knows he can't let personal feelings get in the way or he'll get killed. Finally, he would be injected just like all the others have, and he would die. He had accepted his fate, however, and he smiled, thinking, it's over now. But as he closed his eyes, suddenly his body began to shake and convulse just like the others. It felt like the most painful feeling in the entire universe. That serum did something incredible to him. He was compatible with it, and he finally was given the X gene within it, which ended up activating Xehther's untapped gene, which determined whether he would grow to have a quirk or not. In the moment of death, Xehther would get miraculously lucky and survive, because the dormant quirk that he had up inside of him was something that nobody else could have predicted. Luck. he would have miraculous luck. That's the only reason he survived. Had he had a fire quirk, his death would have been inevitable. Ice, inevitable. Something along the lines of All Might, certain death. But his quirk has probability manipulation, and it can get the best outcome out of anything possible. And that's exactly what happened. He woke up a couple of seconds later, and he felt stronger than ever before. All of them would be around Xehther, and Xehther would look at them all with a weird confused expression on his face as he snaps the restraints that were on him. He says, "What happened?" They look at him, and the doctors would rush to him, checking his vitals and everything, as they would ask him how he feels. Xehther would simply look around and see the death and chaos that happened, and Gambit would rush in for a hug, saying he's sorry for having to do that to him, but that was his job and he had to do it. He would hug him as tightly as possible, and Xehther would push him back, saying that there's no way he's gonna hug him. He just basically would have killed him had he not gotten lucky. He says that he'll never want to speak to them again, and he would say that there's no way he's gonna go through with this mission or any of the things that they want him to do. But it would be at this point that a bunch of guns would end up aiming their laser at Xehther, and he would realize that all of them are trying to kill him at this exact moment. Xehther would pause for a moment before thinking to himself if what he's thinking of doing is even the smartest move. He realizes that it's not, and eventually he would stand down, lifting his hands up into the air and saying, "Don't worry. I get it. I'll surrender." They look at him, put their guns down, and only 3 of them would still be aiming at him. From here, Xehther would give a fake smile, and from here they would inform him that he has 1 year to get used to his power. Oh, sorry, you know how I said he was 13? He was 14? Not 13. He has 1 year to get used to his brand new abilities and more training than ever. And they would tell him to get ready, because after that year, he's going to be taken to the Hero Commission, where they're going to be deciding what's going to be happening to him, since he is the first super soldier to have actually survived. Xehther's one true goal now is to destroy that organization and make sure that no other kid has to suffer the way that he did. Being quirkless might be hard, but there's no way that being quirkless is worse than death. Xehther watched Logan die, and that's a memory that will scar him and haunt him for the rest of his life. It's never going to get easier, but at least it won't get harder now. Xehther would train for the next year, and he would finally end up being called in by the Pro Hero Commission. Once there, he would end up bumping into a random other person named Endiu, and he'd be wondering, who's that? But ultimately he continues walking into the room, and what he would end up seeing is just 3 men. They would all look at him and say, "Take a seat." And Izuku would do so. Sorry, not Izuku, but Xehther. Every time that I say Izuku, just know that I'm speaking of Xehther, since considering that I've never done like a Xehther story, and all I do when it comes to MHA is like Deku, it makes sense that I'm going to slip up every now and then. So yeah, just sorry about that. But yeah, continuing forward. Afterwards, they would tell him that his mission is going to be to infiltrate UA High, be trained, give them as much information as he can about what's going on in that school. And eventually after that, he's going to get a hero license to operate in Japan. After all that, they're going to be using him as a military asset to take down any and all threats and keep people silent. So essentially, he would say, "I'm a mercenary, right? At least a legal one, under your jurisdiction, am I right?" They look at him and say, "You're absolutely right, kid. But you don't get to say anything about this. You either do it or, well, I don't think I have to tell you the rest." Xehther looks down, and rage would begin boiling in his eyes as he thinks to himself that he'll make sure that one day they're all rotting, just like Logan and all of the other partners that he would have had in there. There's no way that he'll ever forgive them for what they did. And from here, he would proceed to essentially just leave the room, and begin his training for the UA entrance exam. Not that he actually needs it. For the following year, he would continue doing his usual training by upping it by 20 times and basically actually have effects this time. We're now going to fast forward immediately to the final day, in which Gambit and Xehther would have one final sparring session, in which Xehther would completely obliterate Gambit, who is actually a quirk user, and his quirk would give him enhanced reflexes, reaction, as well as an insane boost to his strength. Think Ultra Instinct, but a lot weaker. After this, Xehther would offer his hand up, as he would say that he's not forgiven for what happened. But it was nice to fight him one last time, as from here he would leave the room in silence and Gambit would feel terrible for what happened that day. From here, Gambit would not be able to bear the job that he has and what he did to Xehther. All the other times that have happened before us and he grew closer to kids, they all died. And Xehther was the only one to have ever survived. The only reason he believes, is because of his quirk, and he's absolutely right. If it wasn't for that, he'd be dead. And his work is pretty much killing kids. He can't live with himself anymore, and so he commits seppuku. Gambit's gone. And that's all it is to it. Eventually, finally things would finally happen and Xehther would finally find himself at the gates of the entrance exam. And he'd put in an application to be allowed support items to be allowed a support item in the form of a staff. He would enter and they would be accepted because of the fact that he is stated to be a quirkless individual. However, they haven't updated his forums and anything like that yet. And due to him being lucky, he would pretty much end up taking the written exam. And due to the fact that he has nothing but insane luck, this would be a multiple choice test. And seeing as he has luck, he'd get a perfect score. Without even trying, of course. He simply just looks at the bubbles and clicks whichever one it is that he feels like. Probability manipulation definitely comes in clutch when you're trying to pass a test. After this, however, he would finally end up making his way outside, and it would be at this point that I'm going to tell you guys exactly what Xehther's wearing. So what he would pretty much just be wearing on this particular day would be some dark green not camel colors, but some dark green cargo pants, very durable, some combat boots, and a white tank top. And that's pretty much all he would wear. He would take the exam, and this is when he'd proceed to body the robots left and right with ease, as he would use his enhanced stats to destroy robot after robot, as he would proceed to demolish them all until finally, after destroying a couple of robots, he would see 3-point robot and would rush towards it. Running up its arm after it attempts to punch him, Xehther would jump behind the robot, stabbing his staff straight into the head of it and then spinning it as he then looks towards the direction of another student. And he would pretty much jump off of his back and then lunge at another robot, swinging his staff straight at the head of said robot and straight decapitating it with nothing but his brute force. Many of the teachers that would be watching the test at this moment would be like, are we sure he's quirkless? Like, his strength is superhuman minimum. And they'd be like, allow us to continue watching, Nezu would say. At this point, after all of this would happen and he would finally end up destroying multiple robots, a 0-pointer would finally be unleashed on the city. And it would be at this point that he would be about to go and handle it, right? Handle the situation. But it would be at this point when a boy with green hair would run straight towards its direction. And then out of nowhere, while Xehther's watching, he straight just, like, it looks like bro clenches his cheek, and that's literally what he does. But Xehther watches this, and Deku blitzes up into the air, destroying both of his legs and charging one for all up in his arm. Xehther watches as Deku would throw himself up into the air and bam! Straight destroy the 0-pointer, sending it crashing down at the ground as Xehther would only simply sit there and watch this all happen. He'd realize that this kid is clearly in danger, seeing as it looks like he doesn't know what he's doing, and immediately Xehther would break his way towards the side of a building before parkouring his way all the way up of it, doing double jumps off the wall, like jumping on one wall, then jumping on another wall, then another wall, like sidestepping the walls kind of. And he would parkour his way up the building as he would jump up barely before Deku was about to fall, and he would grab Deku mid-air as he would then throw him on top of a building and they would both land with a thud a bit. Xehther would land just fine, but Deku would feel a bit injured, and it would be at this point that he would look at Deku and say, wow, you banged yourself up pretty bad. You okay? And Deku would just fall unconscious. From here, we would time skip to Xehther meeting with the commission, and he would from here be told about how he should act and how he can't be telling anybody who he is. They'd be getting really serious, and Xehther would simply walk in there knowing that he's about to get either chewed out or just told more and more information on everything he has to do. They tell him that his personality has to be just like the other kids, act like he lived a normal life, and don't show off all of his cards. They don't want all the people in the world knowing how strong their #1 ranked assassin is going to be. So he's told not to use too much of his superhuman strength and always keep it at about 50%. Xehther would end up acknowledging, nodding, and then they would tell him not to tell anybody. They're serious. If he is caught, they're unfortunately going to have to terminate him. And Xehther says, I've heard that 100 times. Can I go now? They say, sure. But make sure that you don't try to betray us or double cross us, because trust me, you know what will happen. He says, yeah, and he walks off. From here, we would time skip to the day when Xehther would walk into his classroom. He sees the normal class for the most part, until finally he turns towards his right, sees a blonde kid yelling, and he would pretty much just make his way towards the sea. Realizing that Ida and Bakugo are both arguing about some random thing, he would sit down and ignore him. And it would be at this point that another boy with green hair would walk in. He walks in, and immediately he would be inclined to go say thanks to Xehther. However, before he could actually even get close and say something, Aizawa would wake up and do his usual BS, leading them all to basically go into the changing room. And since Xehther was informed to basically just do his best, he would to do his best with an asterisk behind it, like 50%, he would pretty much end up getting changed and doing his old usual thing. When people would notice Xehther's physique, Kirishima would be one of the first people to stand up and say something. He'd be like, whoa, dude, you're ripped. What do you do? And Deku would say, yeah, I'd say I'm pretty fit. You were as well though, right? And Kirishima looks at him and says, totally, man. I lift weights. What about you? Where do you work out at? And Xehther says, I work out down the street. And from here, Kirishima would say, awesome, I work out at this other gym. And Deku would be like, oh, that's great. You know, they have a little bit of small talk, as it'd be at this point that another individual would butt in, and Deku would say, yeah, I'd say you're pretty fit. You're so lean though. It's so interesting to me how you could pack so much muscle and not look like bulky. Xehther says that he's been training for that exact purpose and that he doesn't want to bodybuild, he simply wants functional muscles. That's why his muscles are much more compact and he's not worried about how bulky he looks. From here, Deku would end up saying that that's a pretty cool strategy considering he's going to be a hero and he needs to be fast on his feet. Xehther would say exactly. As from here, just so you guys know, he's basically built like what you see in the thumbnail and he looks the same. He's pretty tall too. He's about 6 feet, so he's pretty like decently tall in the world of MHA, seeing as I haven't really seen a lot of people that are that big. So yeah, he's 6 foot tall and he's just gonna stay that height. He's already finished his growing. But ultimately, what would pretty much end up happening is that they would finally go outside. And it'd be at this point that Xehther would have the ball tossed at him, as he would be told to throw it, seeing as he got the highest marks on the exam. First person to notice this and would say something would be Bakugo, who'd be like, huh? How did he get the best scores on the exam? What in the world is your quirk, huh? He'd say, as Deku would watch, and he'd be kind of scared, but Xehther would simply walk past Bakugo not caring, and Bakugo would grab at his shirt. Deku would look at him, and for a second, Bakugo could swear that Xehther was about to destroy him, take him out completely. But Aizawa would say something, and he would end up causing Bakugo to let go of Xehther, leading him to smile and then grab the ball, making his way straight towards the circle as Aizawa would say that they need to throw it now. But Xehther would hold his hand out and he would simply look up and say, fine, you said you want me to go all out, right? And he would use half of his strength, ending up with a grand total score of something actually pretty unexpected, considering that not a lot of people end up getting that great of a score for this part. And that's just due to the fact that not a lot of people can actually get something that crazy, you know what I mean? What would pretty much end up happening is that Xehther would get a grand score of 300 meters without one for all, without some crazy explosion quirk. That is extremely impressive. And after that would happen, they would end up taking the rest of the tests, such as like the grip strength test and the standing long jump, which Xehther would actually clear. Actually, no, I'm not going to say he clears it, seeing as he doesn't want to show everything off, but he almost clears it. And then he would go on and take the grip strength test, which he would then go on to get 530 kgs of force. Not trying to use all of his strength, considering he would actually shatter it if he did, but trying to stay underneath dupli armor, not really pop up too much, you know what I mean? But ultimately, then would come the final race, and in the race, Xehther would actually impress everybody, getting a score of 2.09 seconds. Yup. No, 2.90 seconds, right? Getting 2 seconds and almost 3 seconds, but not quite, right? For the 50-meter dash. Ida would actually be completely impressed, considering that he was the one who ended up getting the highest score, and he didn't even expect anybody else to come close to that. So they're all shocked at the fact that Xehther is considered quirkless. And it'd be at this moment that Aizawa would say something in front of the entire class. He'd say, "Kid, I'm confused. On your record it says that you're quirkless, but it seems to me like you have superhuman capabilities. What gives?" And Xehther would say that ever since he was a kid, he'd been training to be a hero. Seeing as he is quirkless, he's been training harder than anybody else ever could expect. That's why he has such strength. That's why he has these abilities. That's why he can keep up with all these quirked users. And he would take a good look at all of them before saying, "Oh, and by the way, before you think, oh, he's quirkless, I feel bad for him, just know I could easily take all of you down in a fight." And Bakugo would say, "That right? I love your guts, kid. It's going to be even more fun when I crush them." As from here, Xehther would say, "You can try." And from here, what would end up pretty much going down is that the day would finally end. After all of this would happen, Bakugo would say that him winning was just luck. As from here, they would walk over towards the scoreboard, and they would realize that he actually ended up getting first place. By the way, another character who would also be thrown into the story would be a random girl by the name of Luna. Now, she saw that she stands with long wavy hair, hazel eyes, and she's not wearing a costume, but she's just wearing the UA gym uniform, and she'd be very much so curious about that Xehther guy. She thinks he's pretty good looking. And from here, I need to tell you guys, that's the OC in case some of you guys didn't catch it. Anyways, we would then have Xehther bodying the tests, like I said. Oh, sorry, no, that was part of the script. But no, after all this would pretty much end up happening, Izuku would end up asking Xehther how in the world he got so strong being quirkless. He would actually be extremely inspired by Xehther, considering that he was quirkless, but he would have never made it here had it not been for the fact that he got a quirk. Izuku starts thinking to himself that maybe if he would have actually trained and not just bawled his eyes out, he might have actually been able to become a hero without having a quirk, but since he already has it, he now has to go through this journey. He thinks to himself that Xehther's going to be a great beacon of symbol for quirkless people, and he would go on to tell him that, you know, I think he says it for everyone when he says that they're thanking him for being a quirkless hero and attempting it. Something that has never been done before, and him doing that would actually end up raising the hopes of the quirkless community. So, it'd be at this point that Xehther would walk up to Deku and get close as he would ask him about his quirk. He would ask him how in the world his quirk works the way it does. It almost seems like his body's not ready for him. It seems like it wasn't meant for him. And Izuku would kind of like stutter and be like taken aback, as he would not really push forward, Xehther would, and ultimately they would end up just walking out and talking about their different like journeys to get to UA, as ultimately they would split from each other, and finally Deku would get the chance to, well, thank Xehther for the other day. We would then have Xehther just basically walk home, and midway through, Uraraka would actually end up tagging in, as well as the other girl who she would have been talking to, Luna. They then both end up interacting with the two guys, and they pretty much just make their way towards the train station. I know I said that they split, but just take it with a grain of salt. And ultimately after that happens, they all make their way home. After this, Xehther would make his way home, relax, and since it's pretty much the first time he's ever gotten to truly relax, he would finally end up doing what any of us would probably do if we were in his position. Bro lays down on the couch, turns on his 80-inch flat screen, and just begins to binge a ton of anime, watching the different fighting styles that they use and realizing that those fighting styles are completely unorthodox and they would definitely not work in real life. But Xehther thinks to himself that it'd be really, really funny if he was to actually use some fighting styles like that. So he does some light workouts after relaxing for a bit. And after all that happens, he would finally go out and get some grub. Let's say bro pulls up to Cane's and straight pigs out. Like he just gets down and eats whatever it is he wants. He then goes to the store, buys a bunch of snacks, and would get down that entire day, just resting and finally having a great day. From what would pretty much end up happening is that Xehther would be thinking about all of his classmates, and in a notebook would write down quirk assessments. He would start with Izuku, putting question marks and saying that he doesn't know what his quirk is, but it's some sort of super strength quirk from what he can see. He would write question marks, super strength, and then he would write Bakugo, write his explosions, and finally he would get to the OC, which is the reason I'm doing this. And he would write down Luna's name before then ultimately writing down magic. she has the abilities of somebody like Raven from the Teen Titans Go series. A slight bit weaker considering that it is MHA and they don't work through her emotions. It's simply a magic like Quirk, not actual magic. And she has the ability to create barriers around herself. She has the ability to go invisible. She has the ability to shoot projectiles and can fly. And that's pretty much it. So kind of like Nejire actually, but pretty much can actually go invisible and form barriers. That's the only difference. And ultimately after that would end up going down, he would write all this, save it down, and actually send it to the Hero Commission. This is all definitely useful things, and he would finally end up making his way towards some random like shop the very next day in the morning. He wants to go out and get some breakfast, and he would realize that he sees somebody from his class. He walks up and would say, "Hey, what's up?" She looks at him and said, "Oh, hey, I was just getting myself a baguette." And Xehther would say, "That's funny. Haven't really tried one of those yet. Is it good?" And she'd say, "Oh yeah." She breaks it in half and hands him some. And then they would both pretty much start talking and walking. They get to know each other a little bit. And at first she'd be a little bit on the timid and shy side, but 30 minutes later, they'd be having a good time laughing. Xehther would even have his arm around her and he'd be rizzing her up pretty damn good at this point. And Xehther would find out that her quirk was indeed magic and all the other things that he wrote down. He thinks to himself that his quirk assessment abilities have definitely improved from his first time doing this. Back when he was training, they used to have them watch TV, news reports, and film footage of people's quirks, and they would write down and have to assess what they think they are, what the weaknesses are, and stuff like that. Xehther was never really good at that, but after years and years of training, he finally got pretty good at quirk assessment, and he's pretty much a lot better than Izuku is, but you know, that's only because he literally had to train in that, or else he would get punished. You know what I mean? Eventually, they would make their way towards the school, and Xehther would say that he's just lucky he bumped into her. He had no idea she was this chill, and they would end up having a good time until eventually they end up finally sitting down at their seats. And before class would start, she would walk up to him and say, "Can I get your Insta or something?" And Xehther would say, "I don't have one. How about my number?" He smiles and he hands it over and he gives her his phone, and you know, he writes down the number and all that stuff. And after this, we're pretty much just going to fast forward to the afternoon class. After all their normal studies would finally go down, finally we would find ourselves in the situation of the heroes versus villains test. And Xehther would go through the day just honestly having a very chill moment and getting acquainted into his friend group and stuff like that. And I'm gonna say his friend group is Ida, Deku, Uraraka, himself, and Luna. That's pretty much going to be the only friend group that Xehther's going to mainly interact with. And once we finally do get to that part of the day when the class all meets All Might and all that stuff, since Xehther isn't really the kind of guy to be like, "Oh my god, like it's All Might," you know what I mean? He wouldn't do that, and he would actually not be as crazy as everybody else would say he is, right? What would end up going down is that All Might would walk in and he'd immediately be like, "I am here!" As the class would get excited, and ultimately he clicks a button as he would say, "Put these on and meet me outside, because if I've always said that clothes make the pros." Immediately we would have the "My Hero" song playing in the background, and Xehther would walk outside along all of his classmates, showing off his really, really cool looking outfit. Now the outfit that he's wearing is the one that you guys can see in the thumbnail, all right? And it's just great. And that's pretty much it. He's just wearing that, and what would pretty much end up going down after that, or you could also see more pictures of his outfit if you guys just stopped and looked at the what am I thinking about? If you guys just stopped and looked at the yeah, I don't know. If you guys just stopped and looked at the intro, because in the intro, I edited a bunch of pictures in there, or at least I should have, of what Xehther looks like in normal clothes and, you know, what Xehther looks like in other clothes, you know what I mean? But pretty much that's it. And once this happens, they'd go to class and, you know, they make their way outside, and All Might then begins to pretty much introduce to them the concept of the heroes versus villains exam, which essentially is going to be just all of them told that they're going to be facing off against each other and all that stuff. Eventually, what would end up happening is that Luna would walk up to Xehther and say his costume looks awesome. He then looks at her and says her costume looks amazing as well. She looks like some sort of mage or wizard in like a really futuristic kind of sense. She looks at him and says, "Whatever, stop it." And then he pretty much just like smiles, as from here they all walk forward and grab numbers. As luck would have it, Xehther would actually end up being paired with Deku, and they would end up having to face off against Bakugo and Ida. As soon as everything would start, Bakugo would immediately begin rushing down, being like, Deku! And screaming, as he really doesn't like the idea of Deku even being in this school. Not only that, but now he also has to deal with the fact that another quirkless kid who actually doesn't have a quirk actually made it. Bakugo has been having a very strange week, to put it lightly. And ultimately what would pretty much end up happening is we have Xehther and Deku versus Bakugo and Ida. Immediately Bakugo comes in and he would then throw a big haymaker at Deku. Deku catches it, slams him on the ground, and then from here Bakugo gets up and glares at him. And he'd be about to throw a big explosion at Deku and like send him flying, and he would do so. But after he does so, Xehther would tackle Bakugo straight through a window and they would go outside. And Xehther would then, through his communication piece, would say, Deku, find the bomb room, get a hold of it, and make sure that you can handle this situation. I'm gonna be taking out Bakugo, all right? And Deku would be like, all right, but be careful. His quirk is, and Xehther would say, don't worry, I know. As from here, Bakugo would scoff and would say, your death sentence. As from here, he blasts at the direction of Xehther, and Xehther would step back. As from here, Bakugo would get up close and throw explosions at Xehther, which Xehther would dodge easily and begin to land blow after blow after blow on Bakugo. Bakugo, after getting tagged a couple of times, would begin to grit his teeth, saying, how in the world are you doing that? And Xehther would proceed to essentially say that he just is a better fighter than Bakugo is. Bakugo says, I'll be damned if a quirkless loser can beat me in a fight. Take this! Shooting a massive explosion at Xehther's face, which Xehther would barely be able to dodge, but he would get slightly burned on his face. And then ultimately, he would punch Bakugo square in the jaw, sending him flying back, as he then hides behind a building, and he would then grab one of his pistols, right, that he has, and it has like not real bullets, but it has like plastic ones, like rubber ones that still do damage, but they're not fatal. You know what I mean? Like they do enough damage to really hurt somebody, but not enough to like pierce them, and kill them. You know what I mean? So once Bakugo is like finally gathers his consciousness back, he would then begin to get shot at by Xehther as he would fly up into the air, and he wouldn't realize where Xehther is. He's using a very tactical pistol which has like a red laser dot scope on it, and he's just getting tagged over and over and over. Bakugo from here would end up getting enraged as he would shoot up into the air and say, I was saving this for someone else, but it looks like you'll have to do, pulling the pins of both of his gauntlets, and bam, a massive explosion would go down. Xehther would have to take cover behind a building and jump forward as the explosion would fill the area, and Xehther would end up barely dodging it. It would be at this point that Xehther, because of his fireproof costume luckily, would be just fine, and he would then see Bakugo in the air looking around as all the explosions is going down. Bakugo from here would be up in the air as high as he could possibly go, and Xehther would be looking up at him, just like in the art that you guys saw at the beginning. And from here, Xehther would end up pretty much grabbing a sniper, which he has from behind him, and it's like a super high-tech MHA sniper where he clicks a button and like a little like he has a sword sniper. Like, I don't think you understand how badass this is. It's a sword that if he clicks on it like transforms into a full-on sniper with attachments on it, and he then aims it into the sky and straight bam, right as Bakugo was about to come down and howitzer impact him and pretty much GG the battle, Xehther would have ended up like hitting him full blast with a sniper bullet straight to the body, and it did so much damage that Bakugo wasn't able to properly land the howitzer impact. And suddenly, when Bakugo was on the ground, there was smoke and he couldn't see anything. Xehther would come in, having access to tech and stuff like that allows him to have thermal vision and stuff like that. He uses that, gets closer, and with a knife, he would begin cutting Bakugo in non-lethal areas before finally pinning him down, putting the knife to his throat, and saying, "Do you surrender?" And Bakugo would be like, yeah. As from here, Xehther puts the capture tape around him and says, good, because I wasn't trying to beat you down even harder than I already did. As from here, Deku would finally come into his earpiece and say, hey, I found the bomb room, and it looks like Ida's here. I'm going to need some backup. Xehther would say, on my way. And immediately he would use a grappling hook to make his way to the top of the building, rushing towards Deku's direction before then using his gloves to pretty much stick to the wall on the side and climb down until eventually he makes his way to the window where Deku's at, and he would quickly punch it, breaking it, as Ida would say, "Aha! Heroes, you finally came. Well, it sucks to say, but you will not be getting your hands on this." And Xehther immediately bam, 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 shoots a bunch of bullets at the direction of Ida, which he has to jump out of the way and use his speed to pretty much dodge. Eventually, at this point, Xehther and Deku would both lunge in for Ida, and Ida, using his speed, would try to actually catch Xehther off guard. However, he wasn't ready for the fact that Xehther not only is fast from his legs, he's fast from his entire body. That super soldier serum ain't no joke. He would catch Ida's full-on kick with, like, not reciprocal burst, but a normal kick. He catches it, spins Ida around, and tosses him to the other side of the room as he says, "Go get the bomb!" And Deku would immediately tap it, as at this point Bakugo would hear, and Ida and everybody else would hear, "Hero team wins!" And All Might would then congratulate them and say that Xehther was definitely the MVP, Momo would say. As it would be at this point that Xehther would make his way back towards the examination room, and everybody would be watching as, Luna actually gives him a little bit of a smile and says that he did that amazingly. Like, how did he even get that strong? Xehther would say that, he's just him. And then she laughs, saying, "Whatever," as she says, "You better be watching me as good as I was watching you." And Xehther says, "Trust me, I won't miss a second." For some reason, Xehther feels like he's attached to her. He feels like he knows her from another world, but he's just not sure. And yep, it's because he does know her. That's my lady right there, you know what I'm saying? But anyways, continuing the story, what would pretty much end up happening is that Deku would go on to just explain like the backstory between himself and Bakugo, and being like, "Oh, he always bullied me my whole life," while they're watching the battles. And because her battle wasn't for a while more, Xehther ended up finding out a couple details about Deku, and they ended up pretty much having a cool little conversation where Xehther told him about his shortcomings and how life hasn't exactly been easy for him, how he can relate to Deku. And Deku would smile. Eventually, Luna's time would come and she would turn invisible, pretty much leading to her own teammate, which would actually end up being Tokiyami, using his abilities and ultimately making it so that he causes a distraction. She climbs in through the window, taps the bomb, and they ultimately won. Xehther says that was pretty sneaky and that he took a more explosive approach. If he does say so. He then looks at Bakugo as he says that, and he grits his teeth, saying, "I'll kill you next time, you quirkless loser." Eventually though, the day would end, and once it does, Deku would actually end up catching up to Xehther right before he would leave. He would end up thanking him for everything that happened back there, and he would ask Xehther if there was any way that he can give him some pointers on hand-to-hand combat, saying that he's not half as good as what Xehther is. And Xehther would look at him, smile, and say, "Sure." He would say that he would never say no to somebody asking him for help, and he would ask Deku if he would want him to help train in hand-to-hand combat personally. Deku would immediately light up with a big bright smile, and he would say, "Of course, I mean, if you can, then yes, please." And it would be at this point that Xehther would smile and say, "Nah, yeah, it's cool, don't worry, I'll help you out." It would be at this point that they would go to Deku's house, and Xehther would end up meeting Inko Midoriya, the name that I used to mess up on all the way at the beginning of this story, and say, "Whoa, Izuku, your mom sure is nice." And he'd say, smiling, "Yeah, she's the best." It'd be at this moment that Xehther would remember his own mom from long ago, and Inko would actually remind him a lot of it. He'd feel pretty sad, and his look would show that, as Izuku would say, "You okay?" And Xehther would smile and say, "Yeah, sorry, I was thinking about some sad video I saw earlier. Some puppies were homeless." And Deku would say, "Yeah, that does sound pretty sad." As they'd say, "So, what are we going to train on?" And Xehther would spend the next couple of hours beating the knowledge into Izuku, just as he was taught by the organization. By the end, though, Deku would say that this training is inhumane, and Xehther would say that we live in a society with inhumane people. This is nothing. As Deku would get up and say, "You're right, let's keep going." And Xehther would ask why he doesn't just use his quirk. It'd be at this point that Deku would explain that just as Xehther thought, he can't really control it, and not only that, but it takes a huge toll on him. And Xehther would tell him that if that's the case, then they gotta prepare him for it. As he would say, "Don't let the quirk define you, you define it." And Deku would understand that, and Xehther would say his goodbyes to Inko and Midoriya. As from here, they trained for about a week. And every other day, Xehther would also hang out with Luna, as they just go on little mini dates and they have a blast as they go to malls, arcades, and movie dates. They ended up going to watch Aladdin, and it was pretty romantico. Eventually, after all of that, the day would come of the USJ, and all of them would have ended up having to have signed some permission slips. They all made their way back, and the Hero Commission were the ones that signed Xehther's permission slip. But after all that happened, they would pretty much end up making their way towards the bus, and it would be there that they would be told about everything that's gonna be happen. How they're all on the bus, and everybody would finally be talking amongst themselves with their own usual group of friends. They would all be talking in the back, and Xehther would ask all the other people what their quirks are, and he would ask them what their weaknesses are, trying to get to know them more in a friendly conversation-like way. Eventually, they would ask Xehther for his quirk, and he would say that plain and simple, he's just pretty lucky. And Bakugo would hear that as he scoffs and says, "It's not a quirk. You're just lucky, kid." And from here, and Xehther would say that he's not quirkless. I mean that he is quirkless. He's just really lucky. And they would say, might as well have that as a quirk. And Xehther would say, you have no idea. As from here, it would be at this moment that Tsuyu would say, that it's pitiful how Bakugo got beat up so easily. And how, it's surprising that all of this would have ended up happening. Eventually, though, Bakugo would end up being like, "What'd you say?" And the bus would go silent. Luna would laugh as Bakugo would shoot explosions off, and Xehther would tell Bakugo to calm down. Aizawa would do so as well, using his quirk, and at this point, Xehther would look at Bakugo and say not to do that again unless he wants his arms dislocated before they get there. And before anything could go down between Xehther and Bakugo, Aizawa would end up calming that down as well. Bakugo would just stay quiet, and Xehther would go talk with his own group. As from here, we would have them going through the thing just like normal, and just like in the original, 13 would give her speech, as Xehther would get a very strange feeling, and he would look around spotting Kurogiri, as he teleports in, and he would say, "So sorry to interrupt, but heroes, but it seems like we weren't invited." As from here, he would teleport everybody away, and Xehther, Deku, and Mineta, and Tsuyu would all be teleported to the same area. Xehther would land on the boat, and he would immediately look down to see that his classmates were down on the ground. Seeing as he has a luck quirk, of course he landed on a boat, and he was safe and sound. But Xehther would then begin to turn towards the direction of Tsuyu as she would jump out of the water, having Midoriya and Mineta on him. And eventually what would end up going down is that he would end up asking them how in the world they're going to get out of this. And by he, I mean Mineta. I should have probably cleared that up first. He would then say to them that he sees a couple villains climbing to the side, so they can think of a plan and he'll just take them out. From here, he would grab his weapon and begin to boom, 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 just take them all out, like choo, 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 shooting bullets at all of them, rubber ones of course. And it would be at this point that Deku would shoot up into the air and scream, "Die!" As Tsuyu would end up grabbing Xehther with her tongue, and they would all make their way toward the mainland, where once they would end up arriving, a gigantic vortex would suck all the villains in, and they would all be taken out. It would be at this point that he would pretty much make his way towards the direction of where Aizawa was, and he would tell Deku that, they need to go help him. As from here, what would end up pretty much happening is that Deku and Xehther would stay back and would end up helping Aizawa handle the villains. And after seeing that, Shigaraki would then proceed to tell the Nomu to kill that brat, as the Nomu would rush at Xehther, but before he could do anything, Xehther would jump over the Nomu, grabbing his staff and splitting it, as he ends up having a high voltage lightning, kind of like Nightwing little bow sticks, right? From here, he would end up jumping up into the air and stabbing both of them into the Nomu's head, with both sides smashing into the brain, sending a maximum charge right at the Nomu's brain as it falls onto the ground dead, and Xehther would look towards Shigaraki, who looks terrified, and would yell at Kurogiri to get out of there, as Bakugo would come in, rushing in and grab Kurogiri's metal piece before he could even run away, and Xehther would then smile as Shigaraki would rush at Xehther, ready to try to kill him. But as he does that, All Might and the heroes would come rushing in, as Xehther would smile at a terrified Shigaraki, who starts stepping back. But before he could react, Xehther rushes him, sweeps the legs, and zaps him as well, knocking him out, actually taking down the League of Villains this time with no injuries to Deku or even All Might. keeping them with their own limits and making sure that All Might didn't have to destroy his own time limit thing. After this, Xehther would rush to find Luna, who was actually safe by Kaminari's area, as she actually managed to destroy a bunch of villains, and even though Kaminari wasn't that much of a help, she was pretty much the MVP of the area. Once there, Xehther would breathe a sigh of relief as he would hug her, telling her he was worried and she'd blush. After this, he'd realize what he did, back up and be like, sorry about that, and she would be like, it's fine. As after this, we would just move on to the cleanup, and things would be very smooth, seeing as All Might didn't have to exhaust himself, and this time around he'd be fine. So from here on out, we would pretty much just have a 2-week break before the UA Sports Festival, which would consist of Xehther consistently training with Deku and Luna in hand-to-hand combat, and Deku using his quirk more effectively day by day. Deku would have ended up learning full cowling from Xehther when he told him to stop looking at his quirk as some sort of big thing. It's just an extension of him, like it's not a big deal, and he would have told him why he doesn't just channel his abilities through his whole body. At this point, Xehther would also train himself body and mind, mostly in mind because he understands that brute force and power won't get him that far. His luck definitely will with his mind, so he'll definitely train those two things. And it would be at this point when we would have a little bit of a funny scene. They'd be on the radio when an artist would come on and Luna would ask Xehther to try and win 2 tickets, all expenses paid trip to a concert to see whoever you guys think that is a cool artist, right? And from here, the 100th caller would be told that he's going to be getting the tickets. And what do you know, with crazy mad lad luck, Xehther would end up calling beep, 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 the number, and eventually brrr, 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 the phone would ring, and then Xehther would hear, congratulations, caller number 100. You have just won a full 2-person all expenses paid for trip to Vegas. Have fun, and make sure you bring a certain somebody special with you. As from here, the call would hang up and Xehther would get an email telling him and giving him all of the details for the trip. Luna from here would end up pretty much being super excited, and Xehther and Luna now have a full-on expense trip paid for 1 month from now. Anyways though, let's just skip over to when the students are in class and they're all being told about the school festival. They're all told that they have 3 days to prepare, so for the following 2 days, Xehther would train like never before and take the last day to rest and recover. The thing with Bakugo would still happen, and Xehther would apologize to him, saying that, what happened last time was just, like he didn't mean it. And then Bakugo would just scoff, walk off, and from here, we might as well just skip over to the UA Sports Festival, where Xehther would actually be told to cover the speech since, well, he did get first place. And of course, he would say a nice little speech, and the crowd would obviously eat it up. The race would then be announced, and Xehther would look at the timer, and as soon as he realizes this, or sorry, not the timer, but he would look at midnight, and she would blow the starting pistol as all of them would go, and immediately, Xehther would start everything off by running at max speed, blitzing off before even Todoroki's ice could grab him. And so, he would run past the 2 0-pointer robots, as he would get missed narrowly by their punches, but it would be at this point that Todoroki comes in and freezing them, and he would begin to make his way towards Xehther's direction. Bakugo, however, in the air using his explosions would say, "Oh no, you don't!" And it would be at this point that what ended up going down is that Bakugo would end up getting smacked down by Xehther, who pretty much just would end up grabbing a piece of debris from the robots and throwing it at Bakugo mid-air, causing him to fall down onto the ground, and Kirishima from here would then end up getting crushed with a 0-pointer, as well as Tetsu. And it'd be at this point that we would have Xehther be ahead by a pretty big margin, since he would be using his luck, his speed, and his mind to get ahead of Todoroki and take every single corner and take every single little opportunity he could take to beat Todoroki. He'd be ahead by a pretty big margin, and it'd be at this point that Bakugo would come in with his explosion full blast, and Xehther would begin to smile mischievously as he slows down and decides that he's going to do them dirty. He'd wait for them to catch up, and once they do, and they pass the minefield, Xehther would grab one of the pieces of his robots that was like thrown behind, and he would jump on top of it just like Deku would, giving him the idea this time around. And then doing that, he would end up pretty much just blowing his way towards first place, which would send him flying towards it. And it'd be at this moment that Deku would then come in using full cowling, 5%, and end up getting 4th place. Then we would have Ida coming in, getting 5th place, followed by the rest of all of the other participants that would have been there in the original. After this, what would pretty much end up happening is that Deku would just pretty much end up preparing himself for the Cavalry battle. And since Xehther ended up winning 1st place, the team that he would end up assembling would be comprised of Luna, Deku, Uraraka, and they would proceed to have Luna put a strong barrier. Luna, Deku, and Uraraka and Xehther, right? And as soon as the thing would start, Midnight would be like, Cavalry battle, and everybody would be getting all hyped up and stuff. The first thing that would happen is that Luna would proceed to put up a barrier, and it would last through the entire 5 minutes, as Uraraka would make them weightless so that it's really easy for them to carry him, and Luna would actually be the one at the top of it, seeing as she has magic and she actually has the ability to push people away if they were to break through the barrier. So they kind of just be in like a little bit of a hamster ball thing, and they would be super dope. Xehther's team would essentially just go through it like nothing, seeing as the 2 main threats that were trying to get to them, to the headband, wouldn't be able to penetrate it, so they just give up. And now we would have the battles, which will actually be done a lot different. Xehther would fight Bakugo in round 1, which would actually be an insanely close battle, where Bakugo tries to actually face off against Xehther in long range, but ultimately, due to the fact that Xehther would have ended up putting in a submission to ask if he could use his own abilities and like costume and stuff like that, seeing as, he doesn't have a quirk, and it would be told to everybody, and Xehther would just pretty much beginning to get ready to, he doesn't have a quirk, they would say, right? But he does. He definitely does. And he would pretty much just get all of his stuff together, right? And get ready for the fight. And as soon as it would start, Bakugo would shoot a full power explosion to the air and shoot AP shots at Xehther, who would be on the ground. Xehther, using his tactical belt, would end up dropping a smoke bomb, and Bakugo with an explosion would clear the smoke bomb, shooting AP shots at Xehther once again. Eventually, Xehther would say, a long-range battle is the last thing you want to have with me, Bakugo. As from here, they would shoot AP shots, Xehther would be sniping, and Bakugo would be dodging with his abilities of explosions as much as he possibly could. He would get tagged a couple of times, but Xehther would as well, considering that Bakugo's not just going to miss everything, you know what I mean? Like, he's definitely not the strongest person in the world, but he's also not weak, so he definitely tags Xehther a couple times. But through that, Xehther wouldn't really get too hurt, and what would pretty much end up happening is that Xehther, using a sniper and a pistol in tandem, would be able, dual wield pistols with like little like range and suppressors and stuff, would shoot little bullets at the direction of Bakugo, causing Bakugo to get tagged over and over and over and over. And not to mention, Xehther would be landing every shot at one point, considering that his luck would go into an overdrive mode where the probabilities of Bakugo dodging out of the way would then lead him to getting hit by the other gun, and then when he would try to dodge one bullet, he'd get hit by the other gun, because it's 2 guns now, so the probability of both of those is thrown in there, and Deku would land every single, but Xehther would land every single one of the bullets on him. And eventually after that, Bakugo would finally be taken out in terms of durability, landing on the ground, leaving Xehther to pretty much take out his staff, spin it in the air, and then like do like a Robin like S type move where he if you guys have seen like the super like the jumps where people like will stab the stick into the floor and then they'll like bend it and shoot towards the direction, like they'll jump over this like thing. That's what Deku does, except when he jumps at Bakugo and kicks him square in the stomach, sending him flying out of the arena, leading him to win and ultimately face Uraraka next, which honestly is just an easy dub. I mean, there's really no need for me to cover that, right? So yeah, Uraraka stomped. Eventually, what would end up going down is that Xehther would be told that he's going to be facing off against Todoroki in the finals. He would look up, see Todoroki and himself matching up, and he would think that this one's going to be a bit more tricky. But seeing as Xehther has a luck quirk, as soon as Todoroki tries to do something, he would actually have his quirk act up, as in he sends ice in the complete wrong direction, and Xehther would blitz Todoroki as he would proceed to basically perform a barrage of attacks, which would be hits and combos on Todoroki, ragdolling him and then grabbing his collar and trying to throw him off while doing a sort of flying lotus type of thing. And well, it wouldn't work. Todoroki would use his eyes, catch himself before he would fall off, and he would immediately shoot more eyes towards the direction of Xehther. Xehther would think to himself, oh crap, and he would immediately take out one of his blades, jumping up and stabbing it into the ice, as the ice would then go up and Xehther would just be taken along with it. He then begins to stab his knives into the ice until he gets to the top to the highest point of it, and from here he slides down it with his pistol out, aiming it at Todoroki and shooting. Bam, 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 the shots would go, and Todoroki would just look up, and he's trying to dodge, but every single one of these bullets would hit Todoroki. Eventually he puts up a barrier of ice, which means he couldn't see Xehther, and by the time that ended up happening, Xehther was already right there in front of him. Xehther immediately proceeds to sidestep the ice and see Todoroki. Todoroki was planning this, however, and he plans to pretty much just freeze Xehther completely. He would immediately stomp and begin trying to freeze Xehther completely, but it wouldn't work. Xehther would jump up into the air, and then with his bow staff, he would slam it into the ice, and seeing as ice is made out of water, I think it would be conductive. So the ice itself would end up conducting the electricity and the voltage to Todoroki, and Todoroki would end up getting shocked, stunning him, leading to Xehther rushing in, seeing as for his entire life, he was trained as a mercenary, so whenever he gets like shocked or something like that, it doesn't affect him as much as you guys would probably expect. At one point or another, he ended up getting the Killua special, where people would pretty much shock them so they could build a resistance to it. They would also sometimes put them in very, very hot environments, very cold environments, so Xehther's pretty much used to all of this stuff. He would rush in, land the blow, and eventually Todoroki would get knocked out, ragdolling onto the floor, as from here, he would win, and honestly, it would be magnificent. Of course, after that, the sports festival would conclude, and Xehther would finally be awarded with the first place medal. And now, I bet some of you guys are like, wait, what happened to Luna? Like, what happened to her? Well, let me explain. She was completely caught off by Shinso. Flashback time! She and Xehther talked before their match, and she said she'll meet him in the finals. But she loses to Shinso. Why? Because she's a bit cocky. Honestly, she thought that with her incredible skill set, she was going to be advancing to the finals like nothing. But, unfortunately not. Not against somebody with mind control. Now, cameo with Luna. By the way, guys, my girlfriend's going to be doing some lines for this next part. So, say what's up, babe.
Hi.
Anyways, Midnight would say, begin! And immediately Shinso would say, what's it like to be born with an amazing quirk, eh? And she says,
let me show you.
After this, she gets eliminated by Shinso, who tells her to walk off like a goofball, embarrassing herself. She does one of those little embarrassing dances that we used to do when we were kids, and then shortly after, she makes her way towards the locker room. Once there, Xehther arrives and... How you feeling?
How do you think I'm feeling? I just got embarrassed in front of millions.
After this, Xehther would say, well, at least it was pretty funny. Plus, you learned a lesson on being overly confident.
I guess. Anyways, congratulations on your win out there. Honestly, I know you could do it. You always did seem to pop out more than the others.
Immediately, she hugged them, and then they would just laugh about it for a minute before finally deciding that they're gonna go out for some celebratory ice cream. After this, eventually the day would end and we would have a brief time skip. Xehther would see a notification up on his phone, and it says that he has a mission. He has to suit up. He has to take out the hero killer tonight, and he has become a problem. This is when Xehther would ball up his fist in a bit of rage and anger at the fact that he's being treated like a dog. I mean, all they do is send him a message and he has to do whatever it is that they say to him, or he's toast. I mean, he has to do what they say, and he's starting to get tired of it. He hates the feeling of having to do what other people say. Xehther's not really ever been a kind of guy who loves taking orders. He's not really the kind of guy to be not the top dog, if that makes sense. I'm sure most of you probably thought that the notion of this was gone, of the Hero Commission being a very prominent thing, but no, and it's very real, and the problems with all of this is only going to get worse and worse during the series. Xehther would suit up in a tactical outfit, similar to Domino's, and he would proceed to track down the hero killer. Xehther would also be wearing a mask, by the way. He would track him down to an alleyway after being taken there by a jet, and he would arrive at Hosu City. And after scouting the area, he would finally determine where he believed Stain to be. Remember, guys, Xehther isn't just some random guy with a luck quirk and he's all laughing and chill all the time. He is quite literally a trained killer. And when nighttime hero patrols come around, Xehther is just at a rooftop chilling with a sniper in one arm and just using a little bit of using the sniper scope to just look around. He's using a thermal scope, by the way, which can have access to toggling and basically making it so that he can switch it between thermal or normal, right? Now, Xehther would be at one of the highest buildings, a decent distance away from where he thinks Stain is going to be, since most of the time that Stain does things, he does them in alleyways, catching heroes off guard and making sure that he makes examples of them. Xehther would be using the same sniper that you guys would see in the thumbnail, or actually, I don't know if he's even in the thumbnail. I haven't even decided on that, but he would be using a sniper, and it would be the one in one of my art images. But as soon as he sees Stain, he would immediately take aim and almost about to shoot Stain right through the head, causing him to drop dead. But it'd be at this point when a portal would open and Shigaraki arrives, as well as Kurigiri. Editing Xehther here. Now, while I was recording this video, I ended up realizing that I messed up the recording, and since I don't want to record an entire hour just to fix this little part, I just want to tell you guys, I know I said that Shigaraki and Kurigiri come, but instead of that, let's just say that it's all for one using one of his no moves with the portal quirk to talk to Stain and offer him a position. Now, because of that, Stain ends up accepting, and he's waiting for all for one to recruit him and all that stuff. Then he gets sent back to the alleyway, and then everything that happens. Also, by the way, this also means that the Nomu attack on Hosu never happens, so Izuku's internship is a little lamer, but other than that, everything else that I said is still the same. Xehther, seeing this, would be interested, and so he would hold off on firing on Stain. He simply watches, taps his intercom, and informs the Hero Commission of this. As from here, they end up taking Stain away, and Xehther, like I said, would inform them, asking them if they have any plans for that organization. They would say that they do, and he would simply say, "Roger that," as he waits for Stain to return. Finally, about 5 minutes would pass, and it'd be at this point that Stain would exit the portal. And Xehther, being so bored after having to wait for such a while, he would decide to, instead of just taking him out in one fell swoop, he wants to go in and actually take him out personally. He wants to see what this hero killer guy's all about before he ends him. So, he decides to rush in and fight him hand-to-hand combat. However, he's not going to be taking any chances, so he makes sure that before he does that, he would take aim towards Stain's leg, and he would shoot him, making sure that he would weaken Stain so that he doesn't have the upper hand whatsoever. Then, he would begin rushing from rooftop to rooftop, making his way there to finish the job. Once arriving, he sees Stain bleeding, and he would stare Deku down, asking who he is. Xehther saying that, "Who? Him? He's his executioner." And Stain would laugh before saying, "I won't let anyone other than All Might kill me." Xehther would laugh and say, "Well, sorry to disappoint," rushing in and getting into a sword fight with Stain, keeping up blow for blow, shocking Stain, who would create space and ask how he learned to fight like that. But Xehther stays silent. Stain goes all out using his bloodlust, but Xehther would be completely unaffected and laughs it off, continuing the fight, eventually getting caught off guard by Stain and actually getting nicked by the knife, before thinking to himself, "Shit, I don't know how I let myself get tagged." He doesn't realize that Stain's about to use his blood curdle ability because he doesn't know that Stain has that quirk. But luckily, before Stain would actually end up licking the blood off of the blade, a pro hero with a weak flame quirk would end up coming in and shooting flames at the direction of Stain, causing him to have to jump back, and Xehther to have the opportunity, with his luck quirk, to simply aim at Stain, bam, blasting him square in the head, one-tapping him, and leaving the area, not being noticed by the hero, who knew someone was there but not exactly knew who. And that's just one of the moments where Xehther's luck came into play, and it saved him of a situation that could have been bad. He ends up escaping, and after this, Xehther would leave the area and return to the city where UA is located, and his home, as he would be told that he did well by the Hero Commission. The commission would then tell him that he has someone that they want him to meet, by the name of Endu. He's another agent who was trained just as well as Xehther and has a stone quirk. He can manipulate stone to his own free will. He is an OC that I'm going to be adding, alright? So, if you guys want to know what he looks like, then go back towards the intro. I'm just going to be having a bunch of art that is just going to be displayed. It's going to be things of Xehther fighting this guy. It's going to be like pictures of me in like a hero costume. It's going to be pictures of me and my girls OC and all that stuff. And it's just going to be really cool art pieces if you guys want to check those out. Also, I'm also going to be posting a bunch of them to my Instagram. So if you guys want to see those, go follow me on Instagram. It's literally just Xehther. I have like such a small amount of followers that, that you might not even believe it's me, but it's my account. Anyways, though, eventually after this, Xehther would enter the room and both of them would be told to sit. Xehther does so, but Endu refuses, and from here, they're briefed on a mission. they're both going to have to be carrying out together. Xehther and Endu would immediately look at each other with looks of, looks like I'm going to have to do this. And eventually we would skip to the next day, where the students would have to choose their names. Xehther would arrive to class and he'd sit next to Luna, as he would begin to talk to her, and it would be at this point when Midnight would come in and tell them to pick hero names. Xehther would ask if she knows what to name herself, as she would say, not really, and Xehther would suggest a name. He would say, you should name yourself the Shield Hero Luna, because her name already sounds like an awesome pro hero name. By the way, in case I wasn't clear with what I said earlier, Xehther and Endu would just be introduced to themselves and told that they're going to be going on a mission someday. Not exactly told what mission, not told when or any of that stuff. Just told to be prepared and that they're going to be seeing a lot more of each other. That's all it was. I don't feel like I clarified that enough, so there's that. Anyways, after Xehther would suggest that name to Luna, she would smile, asking if he knows what he'll call himself. As Xehther would say he knows exactly what his name is going to be, saying that he's going to be known across the world as the lucky hero, Domino. Saying he's a lucky guy and things just always seem to fall into place for him. Thus, Domino. As she would say, honestly, that's clever. Since he has some sort of strange effect on everything, things always seem to fall into place just like he said. And from here, they would both write their names down and present them to the class, where they would go up and it would pretty much go extremely smoothly. The class would begin to see their requests from heroes, and Xehther would see a pro hero by the name of Snipe, deciding immediately that he's going to be going there, informing the hero commission of what he's going to be doing, and from here, Luna would decide to go with the pro hero Mirko, as she actually puts a request for her, and yeah, that's pretty much how that's going to go. Now, we're just going to go ahead and skip over to when Xehther would arrive at Snipe's agency, as he would proceed to ask Xehther to show him what he got. So they would make their way outside, where Snipe would end up asking Xehther how good he is when it comes to, long-range weaponry. And Xehther would say that he's actually very, very skilled. He's been training for years. Ever since he was about 10, he would say. Lying, obviously. But Snipe doesn't know this, and he doesn't need to know this. Xehther doesn't want to inform too much, so he kind of just made a bunch of lies and cover-up stories for the hero commission that they gave him, and that's exactly what Xehther would use to get away with many of the things. Eventually, Snipe would end up proceeding to ask Xehther for a little bit of a gun duel, where they basically have to hit a target that is going to be extremely far, some close ones, and a medium distance one. And I guess they would end up doing so. But not only that, they're going to be using their own guns of choice, as Snipe would demonstrate and aim as he would shoot and hit the mark. Xehther would smile and say that that's easy, as Snipe would say, we'll see. And Xehther would 360 no-scope it, and you guessed it, bro would hit it. Now, was it because he was actually aiming? Nah, bro straight ricochets the bullet off of something, it ricochets off something else, and then it hits the target right on the dot. And Snipe would be so impressed, saying that the only other person he's ever seen shoot like that was the pro hero. He stops and says, don't worry about it. He would end up telling him that what he just did is more than just luck. It's remarkable talent. He ends up asking exactly how he learned to do that, and Xehther would say that his father was in the army, and he taught him how to use a firearm since he was young, and he's been a natural ever since. He's also undoubtedly extremely lucky. Snipe would say that that's insane, as he would say that there's not really much he can teach him when it comes to artillery, considering that he's already extremely well versed in that. So instead of doing that, Xehther would pretty much just go on mainly patrols and learn how to run a pro hero agency around civilians, as well as, just little basic pro hero rules and stuff like that. And that's pretty much how Xehther's internship would go. We'll then skip on over to when the class would essentially return, due to Stain being taken out by Xehther. We'll then return back to when school would finally come back. And this time, if you guys do remember, Xehther took out Stain. So Ida never gets hurt. There is no Hosu City incident. I mean, there is, but it's not like it was in the original where Ida ended up getting hurt and Todoroki came in. No, instead, Gran Torino and Izuku ended up handling the Nomus themselves, and since Izuku was well more versed with his quirk, he actually has good access to an already 20% full cowling due to the fact that he and Xehther have been doing some training after school. His training with Gran Torino was hard, but seeing as he's been used to Xehther's training, it was not as hard as it would be in the original. We'll now finally skip over to what would pretty much end up happening on the day, and we would pretty much end up having the hero race to see who could rescue All Might, just tracking their progress. Xehther would arrive back to class as Luna and Deku walk up to him, and they would ask him how his internship went, to which he would say, well, I learned a lot about how to run an agency and basic hero things. I didn't really approve of myself that much. What about you? From here, Luna would say her internship was great, how she got to meet Mirko, and it was awesome. She learned so many things about being a hero, and since she trained her, her barriers got even stronger. Xehther would say, wow, honestly, that's impressive. Then asking Deku about what his internship was like. And Izuku would begin talking about Gran Torino, how it was tough, but Xehther would stop him, interrupting him, and say that was nothing. Later, they're going to train like never before. And it'd be at this point where we would have the race event, which doesn't really matter, and Xehther would win. So we're basically just going to be skipping over to when they're told about the finals. And this is when they would announce the finals as well as the Forrest training camp, which will happen in about 2 weeks. They're going to be having 1 week to study for their finals. Oh, sorry, not 2 weeks, but 1 week and 2 days. And then 2 days to prepare themselves for the Forrest training camp. So, for now, they all decide that they're all going to be going to the mall together and seeing how those things play out. Eventually, they end up going to the mall, and in the original, we have the scene in which, Shigaraki attacks Deku and he'd be like, I hate you. That would still happen just like in the original. However, Xehther would be nowhere to be seen due to the fact that he and Luna would have actually ended up being off together shopping for their own clothes, considering that in a couple days from now, they're finally going to be having the chance to go on that concert they've been wanting to go to. After school, they immediately went to the mall, and even though all of them were together, they ended up going off on their own direction. And so they ended up shopping for their own outfits during the trip. And what would pretty much end up happening is that they're informed that the trip's going to be 2 days. It's going to be all expenses paid for. And Xehther finally gets the chance to go shopping. He gets extremely drippy, and so would Luna. They both get extremely dope outfits. She gets a white shirt and blue denim jeans and a little gold bracelets on her. She also has like this really cool looking gold necklace. And Xehther gets the Xehther outfit. Obviously, jean jacket, white shirt, black denim jeans, and some white Air Force Ones, because why not? And they would end up taking a picture next to some cherry blossom trees. Xehther has this okay, I don't want to take this picture face. And Luna is just extremely excited, grabbing onto Xehther and hugging him as tight as possible. Anyways though, after this, we would finally have them both go on a plane, and this would be during the time that they have to study the 1 week for their finals. So the 2 days beforehand, they would end up making their way toward the plane, and they pretty much just end up studying on the trip. Not that they really have to, considering that they're both extremely smart. What would pretty much end up happening is that they end up making their way, and in about 2 hours, they end up arriving to the place where the artist is going to be at, the concert. And honestly, they have a blast. They get all expenses paid, they meet the artist, and all of this greatness will just happen in one night. Eventually, as soon as it would be time for them both to pack it up and pass out, they both, they're both getting ready for bed. Xehther watches Luna do her whole skincare routine, girly stuff. And right as he gets out of the shower, he realizes that he got a notification from the Hero Commission. He has a mission in about an hour. Luna would basically be getting ready for bed, and eventually after 20 minutes would pass, she would finally pass out. Xehther, though, would be wide awake, thinking about the fact that he has to go on a mission soon. And so, he would stay awake, getting ready to go on his next mission, taking out a new gang boss by the name of Overhaul. Xehther would be asked to take him out swiftly and without making a big scene, right? That's pretty much what the Hero Commission tells him. And as soon as he gets the call and would be told that now's the time, he would kind of ball up his fists, gripping it tightly, not wanting to go. His teeth are gritted and he's just feeling angry. But he knows that he has to leave. He really doesn't want to leave Luna's side, because if he's being honest, he's grown so close to her in this past time that honestly, he would leave everything behind for her, but he can't. He ends up grabbing all of his gear and he runs out of there, but right as he does so, Luna would have seen him go off and wondered what he was doing, as she saw him grabbing his costume and leaving, wondering what that was about, but wouldn't question it until he finally returns. Xehther would proceed to get into a secret plane with Endu and fly off to where the base of Overhaul is located. Xehther asking, so, what's your story? Why are you here? You hate the Hero Commission too? Me personally, they got me working like a dog. Who do they think they are? Endu would say, well, we are in the same position, being treated like dogs. What else can I say? Now, if you don't mind, I need to get my head in the game. From here, he would stay silent, and Xehther would wonder what's up with him. But eventually, they arrive and would scout the area. And from here, they would climb to the air ventilation systems of the building where Overhaul stays at. Noticing that there's a lot of perps outside, they would make their entrance and exit very, very silent, or at least they would try. They make their way in there as they would proceed to grab some knockout gas, enough to take down a couple of elephants, and most of the most weaker men would fall once being exposed to this. They're all unconscious, and afterwards, they would sneak in through the back with Endu, making no noise, and they would proceed to walk inside until they spot an underground bunker. Once there, they would go inside and see Shisaki, or Overhaul, performing a sick experiment on a child, as he would feel sick to his stomach and have a flashback to when he had the serum injected into him. At this moment, Xehther would remember all of the painful memories of when he was having horrible experiments done on him to try to make him stronger, and he would have a rage like none other come over him. But before he's able to even do anything, Endu with an expressionless face would take aim right at Shisaki's head, and boom, Chisaki would fall to the ground right after healing Eri, as Xehther would drop to the ground, grabbing Eri and saving her. He would then take photo evidence of what the organization had done to her and how they were up to no good. From here, he would restrain all the people that were there and take one quirk destroying bullet for himself. He knew he would need it later, and the rest he would give to Endu. And then, from here, this is when they would end up getting ambushed by one of Shisaki's top dogs, Kendo Rappa, who walks in and says, "So, you killed the boss, eh? Well, since you took my greatest rival and future enemy, I guess that makes you stronger. Fight me like men." And from here, he says, "I'll take you both on, no weapons attached." As from here, he rushes Endu, who puts a stone barrier in front of himself, and then Kendo would still manage to punch straight through it, dealing damage on Endu, shooting him back flying, as Xehther shoots at Kendo with a pistol, and the bullets themselves would only be able to do a small amount of damage. It's almost like they bounce off of him. This is not what Xehther was expecting, and after this, Endu would widen his eyes, watching Rappa blitz at Xehther and almost hit him, if it wasn't for Xehther falling and tripping, narrowly missing that punch. His luck! Which definitely would have taken a massive toll on him, but after this, Xehther screams, "Endu, now!" And Endu forms a dome of cement around them, coating the place in darkness, and Xehther and Endu would use smoke bombs to defeat Rappa in the dark. Without him being able to see anything, though as powerful as he may be, he wasn't able to land a single blow on them. They have so much skill when it comes to dodging blows that it's just funny to them. Afterwards, they're able to defeat Rappa in the dark and immediately would assassinate him, not letting him deal any damage. He's definitely a big threat. And after this, they both would end up dapping each other up, courtesy of Xehther saying, "Yeah, we did it." Endu would look at the direction of Xehther and end up pretty much like, just dapping him up. And from here, Endu would make the cement go back away. And he says he's way too skilled for a 15-year-old kid. And Xehther says, "Yeah, you could say so. I mean, I have been trained since I was basically birthed, day and night." And Endu says, "I know what that's like. I was trained sometime when I was 18 till now." Endu's 26, by the way. Xehther would be about to ask more, but suddenly he sees Eri. This is when Eri would begin to ask him what his name is, and Xehther would tell her that his name, well, it's Xehther. And he and her, they're going to be like older brother and sister, he and her. And that the other guy, his name's Endu. He's a friend. She would then say, "Hi, Xehther," and then she'd say, "Thank you for rescuing me." As from here, he'd say, "No problem, kid." And he would take Eri to the police department. She would then from here be taken in by the Hero Commission, which Xehther is completely unaware of, but because he needs to return back to the hotel he at Luna stayed at, he would completely forget about what's going on in terms of the mission and immediately get right back on the jet. Endu would be the first one to get dropped off nearby one of his locations, and Xehther would then be taken back to that hotel that he was staying at. Eventually, he would make it back and sneak back in with normal clothes and his hero outfit costume in a bit of a briefcase. As she would be awake, and she looks at him asking where he was. He chuckles and says that he didn't feel okay and he just went out to take a walk. But she would tell him that she saw what he did and what he was wearing. As she would say, "I want the truth, Xehther. I'm not here for lies." And he would then immediately get extremely serious, asking, "How much did you see?" She says, "All of it." Oh no, not all of it. But she says, all I saw was you leaving. All I want is the truth. He proceeds to immediately take a knife out and pin her to the wall, saying, listen, forget what you saw, for both of our sakes. It would be better if you didn't know anything, alright? Just forget about it. He presses the knife to her neck and then looks into her eyes with a menacing, chilling glare, sending shivers down her spine, making her feel terrified, thinking that this is the true Xehther. Seeing this, though, Xehther just can't. He drops the knife and says, I can't do it. As he sits down on the bed holding his hair and kind of like gripping at his head as he says, look, I'm not the guy you think I am. I'm not some random 15-year-old. I don't just go to UA High, and I'm not some regular person. He would then begin to tell her about his past and how he saved Eri and even killed Stain. She's surprised and she says, what do you mean your past? What happened? And Xehther would say, well, to cut it a long story short, back when I was a kid, an agency that wanted to take a hold of quirkless individuals ended up offering my parents a loathsome amount of money, and they ended up giving the rights of me towards this organization. They would have trained us day in and day out since we were 4 until we were 14, and once we were, they ended up injecting the serum into us, which would make us super soldiers, which would technically end up giving us abilities that even quirkless people weren't going to be able to attain. They tried it with quirkless people, but the success rate was in the negatives. It quite literally was not compatible whatsoever. They tried it with a quirkless person and it was close. They ended up trying it more and more and more, and every single year they would have more quirkless kids under their organization, training them, and eventually when the day would come, none of them would survive. They all died. I just so happened to be one of the lucky ones who did survive. And let's just say that wasn't so lucky. After that, they ended up taking me in, and they ended up pretty much making me a gun for hire, a mercenary, you could say. And that's it. They made me come to UA because I need a pro hero license, and someday I'm going to be a hero by day and a killer by night. And that's it. I guess after hearing that, you probably don't think that highly of me anymore. I can get out of here now if you want. But do me one favor. Don't tell anyone. Because if anyone knows that she found out, he will be forced to kill her by his agents. And if word gets out, he'll be under lots of trouble. They will most likely try to kill him after, for failing and being caught. And she would understand, saying, I won't say anything. You scared me there. For a second I thought you were a villain, but now I see you're just the guy I thought you were. You're a good guy, forced to do things you don't want to do. He stays silent, and he would tell her he has to go now, since she already knows, and she would tell him she'll help him take his mind off of that, as she begins to poke fun at him and try to brighten the mood. Eventually, they end up pretty much playing Monopoly all through the night, watching some movies, eating snacks, and just the basic things that couples would kind of do. Eventually, after all of this would happen, they would return back to UA, and Xehther would be a little bit preoccupied with Luna, knowing to think about Eri, but he would definitely consider asking the Hero Commission how she's doing the next time he's informed that he needs to go on a mission. And now, we would cut over to the exam, which would go however I feel. I mean, Bakugo would still be with Deku, and instead, it would be Xehther and Luna who would have to face off against Ectoplasm. This battle would be a pretty interesting one, considering that Xehther and Luna, once they both realize that they're paired up with each other, they would both laugh and say that this is going to be too easy. Ectoplasm, who would be watching them, would say, I don't think it will. And from here, both Xehther and Luna would immediately start the battle off by saying, let's do this! They get back to back, and Xehther takes out 2 dual-wield pistols before aiming them at the direction of the ectoplasms and then shooting the bullets at them. It'd be at this moment that she would proceed to shoot magic attacks, and those same beams of energy would end up tagging all of these ectoplasm beings and blowing them into the wall. Eventually, more and more ectoplasms would end up coming out, and Xehther would say, you ready, Luna? And she'd say, you know, I was born ready. She immediately flies up into the air, and she would shoot at all of them, just shooting, and Xehther would be laughing as bullets just begin going crazy. Eventually, from his wrist, a little gauntlet submachine gun would come out, and then he would proceed to shoot towards the direction of all of these ectoplasms. Realizing that the ectoplasm, the real one, isn't there, Xehther would say that he's most likely on the rooftop. and she would say, "Make your way there, I'll hold them off for you." Xehther from here would begin to make his way towards the direction of where he believes the real ectoplasm is, and once doing all of this, he would finally end up getting closer and closer towards the real ectoplasm. When he gets closer, the clones would become even more thick and denser, and they end up becoming more in numbers. However, Xehther would pull some Madara type stuff and would end up absolutely obliterating them. They have to tag team and destroy ectoplasm, and ultimately once their teamwork would end up getting better and better, Xehther would end up taking out more and more of these clones, as Luna would end up flying up towards that direction, and Xehther would say, "That's the real one," as Luna would immediately form a barrier around ectoplasm, and now he can't make doubles of it, like he can't make clones of himself anymore, so he's just stuck inside of Luna's barrier. They both go like this, like they dab each other up, and they're like, "Yeah!" And from here, ectoplasm would simply say inside of the barrier, "Good work, kids, you passed." From here, they end up then being all told about the Forrest training incident, and since this time around, Shigaraki was taken in by the League of Villains, and Shigaraki's not even going to be approaching Deku like he would in the original because of like the stain stuff and all that. We would have just a normal day at the mall with the entire class just chilling and buying supplies for them to go to the Forest training camp arc. Eventually, that day would come, and like I said, since the League of Villains main operators would be taken out, and the fact that they losing many members because Stain would never have his speech, they can attack. For now, all they really have access to is Muscular, Moonfish, and some of the other characters who were there before. But people like Dabi, Shigaraki, Kurogiri, Toga, and even Spinner, they wouldn't even be there. I think Magma might already have joined, but still, that's not quite enough to go and ambush a hero school filled with top ranked heroes. And so, because of that, we would have just a normal time in the Forest training camp. And honestly, as much as it is interesting to see some stakes up in the My Hero Academia world, I think it'd be really cool if we finally just got to see them actually just have a normal training exercise. Obviously, the first one that we got to see was Bakugo versus Deku, and we do get the Class 1A versus Class 1B stuff down the line, but you guys know what I mean. Like, it'd be a lot more interesting to get more of those, where there is no really high stakes, you know, and it feels more like filler. I don't know if it's just me, but I really just like when the characters are able to chill, be themselves, and have genuine interactions with each other. Maybe that's why I like Dragon Ball filler so much, and Dragon Ball Z Abridged, but I digress. Continuing, like I said, everything is pretty much normal, and eventually after all of this would end up happening, Xehther would actually finally have a mission, where they task him with defeating a rogue member of the Hero Commission called Wade Wilson. He would actually end up having the same powers as Deadpool, which would be that of a regen quirk, and he can definitely fight. Xehther says consider it done, but he has a question. Where's Eri? They would then begin to look at him and say, "Listen, you're not going to be the one asking questions, but since it's you and you completed a couple missions, I guess we'll tell you. Listen to us. When we ended up taking Eri in, we ended up hearing word that she was taken in by an adoptive family. There, she's going to be treated with the best of love, the best of care, and she's going to be living out a normal life. Seems to me like she's going to be having a great life from now on, so don't worry about her. But if you ever want to see her, we can arrange to have you and her meet. This is her address." They would end up giving him some fake address, and they would think like, oh, he's never going to check it out. Like, he'll probably just like ask them to like meet Eri one of these days, so they're not worried about it. And they lie to him. They say that they found her no home and all that stuff, and eventually Xehther believes it. He smiles and would go through with the mission. He tracks down the newly rogued villain using the tech that they would provide him, tips on his location, and he'd even look at a notebook that has all of his information, his fighting styles, his tendencies, the way that he regenerates. He has a regen quirk. And they would give him a lot of tips on his location. He'd be in a rundown warehouse, which he refurbished, and Xehther immediately would put C4s on the wall. Blowing through the door, he would then immediately take out a sniper as he would shoot straight through the head of Wade, basically off-brand Deadpool. Not even close, to be honest. I mean, this is more of a we have Deadpool at home kind of deal, but anywho, he shoots him in his brain and he immediately rushes in. And by the way, the reason that I'm adding this character to the story, it's just a random OC, it's just due to the fact that my character is actually based off of one of Deadpool's well-known friends, Domino. That's where I got my power from, the costume, the whole like vigilante mercenary thing. Yeah, Domino's awesome, so that's who I base my character off of. Anyways though, Wade would jump off after immediately getting shot at, and when Xehther's rushing him, he would then end up blocking Xehther's attacks. They get into a small wrestle scuffle, and Xehther would end up kicking him off of him, slamming his head into the wall, as Xehther would then push him back and throw a grenade at him point blank, blowing him through the walls, and he would end up making his way all the way outside. As from here, they begin facing off against each other. Eventually, Wade lands a punch and a kick on Xehther, sending him flying to the ground, and once there, they end up fighting on the street, throwing more punches and kicks. Xehther would even shoot Wade point blank, and they would continue fighting considering that he has regeneration. Xehther knows about this, so he isn't shocked, considering that he had a briefing on his skill set and quirk and all that stuff, so it makes the process a whole lot easier, but ultimately, it would still be an incredibly hard fight. Xehther rushes in with a sword, trying to slice Wade in half, but he shoots at Xehther, who blocks it with his own sword, and rushing in, slashes at Wade, causing him to catch the blade with the two swords of his own. And they sword clash for a second, before finally, Xehther pushes him back onto oncoming traffic, and Wade tries to escape by getting on top of a trailer-like truck. Xehther unfortunately would shoot the wheel with a sniper, making a multi-car collision accident happen, as Wade would be caught up in the explosion, and Xehther would jump in with a staff, electrocuting him, stunning him, as he then uses a flashbang point blank in his face and puts quirk restraints on him. After this, he has a brief talk with Wade where Wade says he knew this would happen, but it's better than this than to work for them. He'd rather die, and Xehther's wasting his life working for them, just staining his hand on the blood of the innocents. Someday you'll see. Plus, it's not like they'll be able to kill him anyways. I mean, actually, with enough quirk destroying stuff, they probably could. But it is what it is. Like he said, death is much better than working for these absolute garbage of people. And Xehther knows this, but he can't do anything. He simply looks at him, nods, and says, you know, if it means anything, that was a good fight. Haven't fought against somebody like you in a while, and honestly, you gave me a pretty good run for my money. Heck, you even caused me to shed blood. He then spits on the floor, and Wade smiles, saying, I'll be seeing you later, Xehther. As from here, Xehther would think about Eri and how, he did one good thing in his entire life, and that was her. And he would remember the address that they gave him. He realizes that he's actually really nearby, about 5 minutes. So Xehther decides to go into an alleyway, change his clothes, and make his way to Eri's location, where once there, he knocks and he realizes something. It's a fake address. Those sons of B, they lied to him. The person who answered the door wasn't Eri, it wasn't her family, and when he asked them about it, they all acted dumb. They were like, what are you talking about? They were confused. They set him up. You know what? He fears the worst. He's thinking to himself, they're probably even doing the same thing that they did to me to her. I can't let this happen. How could I have been so dumb? I can't just take the hero commission on their word. It's worse. I basically just traded one worse thing for another. It's just like what Overhaul did. From here, Xehther decides to hack into their network and find out as much data as he can. And over the course of the next 2 weeks while he's in school, he would find out tons about the situation. During this time, they end up going to the Provisional license exam, and they end up having all of that stuff go down. Xehther would of course end up passing with flying colors, and he would realize during this time that Eri is going through the same torture he went through. And realizing this, he knows he can't just sit by anymore. He has to stop this, even if it means death. Wade was right. All he's doing is having the bloodshed of innocent people on him. Sure, every now and then he takes out some real villain, but it's not like that means anything. These corrupted individuals, they're running society to the ground. And before then, and if he doesn't stop it now, it may be too powerful to stop soon. So he would go home and he would just be having a terrible day. He texts Luna a big, massive paragraph telling her that he's sorry if he doesn't make it, but as a man, he has to do what's right. That little girl won't suffer because of him. He basically took her from one monster to another, and he knows that he needs help. So he thinks of recruiting Wade. Maybe together they can make it work. She texts him back saying, wait, no, don't do it alone. But Xehther just breaks the phone, grabs all of his equipment, his suit and everything, and then would make his way towards a forbidden facility. The first step of this would be to end up getting some new armor, something so that the hero commission can't know it's him. So suiting up in his original costume with a mask on, one similar to the ones that Nightwing and Robin wear, same character by the way, he would end up making his way inside of there, sneaking in using the air vents and taking out guards sneakily. He would end up making his way towards where they have their armory and weapons. And from there, Xehther would end up stealing tons of high-tech equipment from them, making it so that Xehther now has access to tons of extremely powerful weapons and a brand new outfit that he's going to use to try to break Wade out of jail. The Arkham Knight suit basically is what it looks like if I had to tell you guys what it looks like, right? He knows that he needs help, and with him, maybe, just maybe, he can make it work. Eventually, after having all of this new gear and this new outfit set up for himself, he would decide that it's finally time. He finally has the chance to break Wade out. During this time, he makes his way there, and equipped with all of his gear, he would immediately make his way towards Tartarus. Once there, Xehther devises a plan, thinking to himself that the best course of action would probably be to cause a diversion and make all of the other villains begin breaking out. That way the heroes could be preoccupied with that, and no heroes would end up arriving on standby. Plus the Hero Commission would probably end up sending an agent towards there. He hopes that it's not Endu. But ultimately, he would make his way towards the back, set up a bunch of C4 and blow them to the roof. From here, Xehther would make his way towards the back entrance, bust a hole through the air ventilation, and then once there, he would take out a bunch of guards watching him. He would then shoot at each one of them with tranquilizing darts, causing them all to fall down onto the ground unconscious. And many villains would say, "Break us out of here! Come on! You're breaking in here, you might as well take us out! We'll help you! We can take over the world! Together! We'll do whatever you say!" But Xehther just hears them and doesn't say anything. He just looks at them and says, "Go to hell." As from here, he would make his way towards the direction of where he believes Wade to be at, the death row inmates. And once he ends up arriving, he would catch a glimpse of a woman with blue and purple hair, almost bubblegum looking. And she would yell at him, "Hey, wait, why are you doing this?" Xehther just looks at her and says it's none of her business. She would say that, she would say, sorry. She'd be like, and Xehther would pretty much like start continuing like, okay, I really need to redo that. Okay, so look, he spots Lady Legant, who says, "Wait, why are you doing this?" And he stops. From here, he would look at her and say, "I'm here to destroy the Hero Safety Commission." And he continues running when she would yell, "Wait, I was a part of it. My name is Lady Nagant. You might not have heard of me, but I carried out tons of missions for them. Let me help you. All this time I've been cooped up in the cell, but all I've really wanted to do is to take out the Hero Commission. They made my life a living hell and a bunch of others. I think it'd be a waste if you didn't let me help you. I could be an asset." Xehther looks at her before then realizing to himself that that might be true. He would ask her if she's really the real Lady Nagant and if she can prove it. And she would look at him and say of course she could. She just needs this quirk restraints off of her, and she can prove to him that she's the one and only. As he's about to break her free, when Stone would block his way, he realizes immediately who's in front of him, and not wanting to fight against an Endu, he would reluctantly say, "Get lost, government dog," with a voice changer on, as Endu would then look at him and say, "I can't do that," shooting at Xehther, who jumps behind cover and would engage in a mid-range shootout battle with Endu, taking out a wrist submachine gun and blasting at Endu as Endu creates a stone cover in front of himself, molding it so that he could attack Xehther with a pillar of stone, causing Xehther to have to dodge, and so Xehther would finally just say F it, rushing in with a staff as Endu tries to counter him by shooting him, but his gun jams midway through. He realizes immediately who it is, considering that his gun is never jammed, and he immediately says, "I know who you," before getting flipped to the ground in an armbar, but he would break out quickly, punching Xehther's mask full force, breaking it with a stone augmented arm, and he would shatter the mask. Xehther's lips would finally begin bleeding, and bruises would appear on his face. And now he would look at Endu and says, "So what, you know who I am? I guess that just means I don't gotta hide it anymore. You know this isn't personal, right?" But Endu would then just suddenly shoot at Xehther, who jumps and luckily dodges all of the bullets midair. He 360 jumps in the air and Endu misses all of them. But Endu would whisper under his breath, "That damn lock quirk's annoying." And then he would rush towards the direction of Endu, Xehther would, and he would begin to tackle him down as they exchange blow after blow. And let me tell you, Enyu packs a punch. So every time that he hits Xehther with his stone quirk, he sends him flying back, and he goes to throw a haymaker, which Xehther would dodge, and Enyu's arm would end up breaking the wall. He punches and he hits the wall instead of Xehther because he sidestepped it. Luckily, Xehther doesn't have to hold back, so he uses his full superhuman capabilities, keeping up with Enyu, who definitely hits harder with that storm arm of his, but eventually they go back and forth, and eventually Xehther takes a blade out. He would rush at Enyu, but he shoots a stone pillar at him, sending him flying, as he would end up dropping his sword, and Enyu would rush in with his blade that he took out from his leg parchment. From here, he would rush in trying to finish the job, but Xehther takes out his own blade from his armor, and he would counter Enyu, saying, "That all you got?" As from here, they get into a close quarters knife fight, while Xehther may have more training at this point, and he is the superior hand-to-hand fighter, plus his landing more blows, Enyu packs more damage, plus his experience on missions and his quirk make up for it. They're almost basically dead even. But Xehther ultimately shoots Enyu in a non-vital area when he ends up stabbing it at the direction of Enyu, and they're both clashing. With his other arm, he aims it towards his leg area, his thigh, and he would shoot at Enyu, causing him to stumble back, and then Enyu would then begin to cough out some blood from the punches he sustained. He would then rush in at Xehther, punching him back extremely hard, bruising Xehther's face, and slashing Xehther with the knife across the chest, causing Xehther to slow down suddenly, and then they would both rush in, dropping all their guns, all their weapons, and Naruto and Sasuke style would straight just taijutsu beat the crap out of each other. His straight hands, Xehther grabs Enyu by the head, slamming him into the wall. Enyu would pick Xehther up and tackle him onto the ground. Then Xehther would come in with a punch, Enyu would hit him back with a kick, and they just keep going back at it, going down on each other as hard as they possibly can. They end up landing blow for blow, and Xehther would then finally end up taking a gun, shooting it towards Enyu, but he smacks it out of his hand, punches Xehther in the face, knocks him down, kicks him on the side of the head. Xehther gets up, he grabs Enyu's arm, and he then knees him in the stomach, before then grabbing him by the neck, slamming him to the ground, and Enyu from here would grab Xehther, putting him in an arm bar. He has to dislocate his arm to get free, and it'd be at this point that Enyu will then turn back at him with his knife towards the face of Xehther, but Xehther would jump back, slap the knife out of his hand, and suddenly, right as Enyu would be about to land a finishing blow, and he takes a massive blow to the face, Enyu would get right back up, punch Xehther down to the ground, grab a hold of one of the secret guns that he had behind his back, and he would aim it straight at the direction of Xehther, saying it's nothing personal. He's about to pull the trigger when suddenly an explosion would go off near Enyu, courtesy of Xehther's luck. This would cause Enyu to get weakened way further than he was before, and eventually Xehther would rush in, knocking Enyu down to the ground. And as he tries to get up, he would pick him up by the collar, saying, "You know, I never wanted to do this, but you left me no choice," aiming the gun at the head of Enyu and saying that this is for Eri. As Enyu would say, "Wait, I never even wanted to fight you." He then says, "Save my daughter. If he's gonna fight the commission, her name's Lucy. She was taken from me when I was about 17 years old." And Xehther would stop, as he would then get a flashback to his childhood, stepping back and remembering all the good and bad moments. And then, the worst thing ever, his time with the organization. He backs up and he would say, "Did you say Lucy?" He then says, "So what?" And then Xehther says, "So that's why you want to do this, huh? You're just like me, but you're doing it for her. Am I right? I'm doing it to survive on my own. I guess you really were the badass I thought you were." He then from here extends his arm out to Enyu and says, "Look, why instead of fighting me, why don't you help me? You, Wade, and Lady Nagant, we could do it. We could save everyone, change hero society, and bring back the idea of true heroes. We can stop this whole thing. That crooked organization won't be able to take any more kids from their families. They won't be able to kill anybody else, and they're not going to keep corruption around." Enyu would look at him and ask him if he really thinks they could do it. And Xehther says he knows he can. He has luck on his side after all. Enyu would chuckle before taking Xehther's hand and getting up. From here, they both immediately begin to shoot at the bars that are holding Lady Nagant restraint, and from here, Lady Nagant would break out, all three of them would immediately rush towards the direction of where Wade is at, and Wade would see that Xehther ended up arriving. He would say, "You had a change of heart, huh?" And Xehther would say, "Something like that. Now, what you said about taking down the hero commission, was it true? After we fought, you told me something about that." And he says, "Of course it was. Why would I lie to you? Looks like you finally chose the right path. Before you were a villain, but now, maybe it's time to be a bit of an anti-hero." As from here, Xehther would chuckle, Endu would say, "Badass." And from here, Lady Nagant would proceed to chuckle as well. After this, Xehther says that he and Endu are pretty banged up and they just can't possibly win like this. However, the attack definitely has to happen tomorrow. They don't have the time to end up holding off on this attack, and the hero commission will definitely be ready. So they're going to be having to expect a full all-out brawl. From here, Xehther would say that his injuries are way too difficult and he could not possibly end up surviving a whole lot longer with all of the injuries that he sustained. So he ends up looking towards the direction of Endu and asking him one simple question. "Look, if you're really in this, then we need to go get recovered, and I know just who can do it." They would immediately make their way towards Recovery Girl, and once there, they end up pretty much making their way towards her, as she would end up pretty much being shocked that bunch of four individuals broke in. And Xehther would look at her and say, "Listen, old lady, I'm sorry about what I'm doing right now, but we need to get healed. Just use your quirk on us and we'll leave. As simple as that. We won't harm you, and if you say no, we'll leave. But trust me, we need this. We need your help, Recovery Girl. And I know that deep down in your heart, you know I'm not a bad guy." From here, she would look at them with an expression that shows she feels no fear, and Xehther would say that she needs help. She would then pause, look back and say, "Well, I did take an oath. It's not like I'm gonna let you guys stay in that damaged state." She then proceeds to go towards Xehther, kiss him in the forehead, and kiss Endu as well. And from here, they would make their way out of there as they end up leaving the area, and Xehther would sneak out the window saying thanks. From here, they make their way back towards the area where Wade actually ended up going to his abandoned warehouse, a different one, and they would plan things out. Xehther says they should go in and kill the commission, but Wade says no, they should capture them and show the world their true colors. Death is too easy of a punishment for them. Plus, they need to heal a bit longer. So while Wade and Lady Nagant are making the plan, Xehther and Endu would be passed out, considering that Recovery Girl's quirk makes it so that they use their stamina to heal themselves. Plus, they would end up jamming the big S. They would stam the syringe into themselves that pretty much numbs the pain, right? The big S, if you know what I'm saying. A lot of bodybuilders use it. But anyways, from here, they end up working on a plan to destroy the Hero Commission and reveal the true colors of that organization. A video they would be working on, and the next day, on a hard drive, they would back up everything that has all happened. And they would all agree to end up having to make their way and broadcast this live. They break into a professional live streaming area in Japan, and they end up hacking national television, with Xehther finally coming onto the TV and saying, "If you're seeing this, then we would have probably have defeated the Hero Commission. But if we died, here's some evidence the Hero Society isn't all it's cracked up to be. It's all corrupt. There's some things that the higher-ups don't tell you. Those people that are on top of the world, that accept whether somebody can or can't become a hero, they're corrupt. For years, myself, Lady Nagant, Wade, and even Endu have been forced to kill many, many people under their name. That bloodshed is on our hands, and that's only because they wanted to keep people quiet. How many good heroes do you think we've had to kill just because the Hero Commission told us to? We have to do all those things so that you guys think that the heroes are all this great and amazing thing. But little do you know, it's extremely corrupted. Quirklessness is one of the worst things you could be in this world, and the reason for that is because everybody stopped having a heroic heart. Everybody thinks, oh, a hero will handle it. But what about when there is no heroes present? You guys are just gonna let people die, let people down? Nobody wants to help anymore. The commission is terrible, and they need to be taken out. They've been money laundering, they've been taking kids from their parents, training them and killing them. And all this time, you guys have been laughing and smiling, thinking that everything's just a joke. All you kids aiming to become pro heroes just do it now for the money and fame. Well, it's over. That's done. And Deku would be watching this live, and he'd be shook. and so would a bunch of heroes. They all realize that he's right, and with all the evidence that they would provide, they realize that they're not lying. Xehther's telling the truth. Tons of heroes and citizens outrage at this, and meanwhile, Xehther, Endu, and Wade as well as Lady Nagant would be facing off against tons of special trained killers. Hundreds, thousands. They hold up as best as they can, and using the quirks of Lady Nagant, her bullet, she would end up sniping a bunch of people. Wade would end up using his regeneration to maul through them. Endu would use a stone quirk to shoot pillars at them, knocking them out, and Xehther would simply use his submachine gauntlets on them, taking as many of them as they can. They start to get overwhelmed a little bit, and it'd be at this point that a hero would end up arriving. All Might. He ends up arriving and saying, "I'm a hero, and I can't let these villains loose. So for now, I'll help you. But after this, we're gonna need to talk, Xehther." And so, he would end up saying, "Don't kill them." As from here, Deku would end up arriving as well, even Luna, and she says, "You thought I'd miss this?" And Xehther and Deku would even say, "There's no way I'm not gonna help you out with this, after you've helped me for so long." They then began fighting off against all of these agents, and more heroes would end up arriving. People like Endeavor and Best Genius, and even some other heroes would end up arriving and face off against the heroes that are trying to fight for justice, the ones that just want to keep their jobs, and all the corrupted heroes that are there. It's a full all-out brawl, and eventually, after all of this would be going on outside and people would be losing their lives and the battle would be raging on, similar to that of the villains versus hero final war arc thing, that's pretty much what it would be like. The bloodshed would be insane. However, eventually, Xehther would make his way towards where the Hero Commission would be, and once there, he would say, "It's over. We won. You're exposed." And that no more corruption would ever end up happening. They applaud and say, "You did something foolish. You could have had a bright future with us, but now you die." As from here, 50 red dot sights would aim at Xehther, and they would all immediately jam simultaneously. As Xehther would smirk and say, "Did you forget I'm lucky?" As he proceeds to throw a flashbang and blind them all, taking them down Madara style, and then taking them all into jail, where they all finally belong. This event would go down as the biggest uproar in the MHA world ever, and it would be the day that Hero Society changed forever. Corruption slowly would leave the society after a couple of months, and villain levels would plummet to an all-time low. They captured the commission board, throwing them in jail, and would even end up saving Eri and Lucy. And after the fight would finally finish, casualties would head on both sides, all over, ranging from the number of 100 casualties to 1,000. And eventually, we would make our way towards seeing Endu's perspective when he would finally see his daughter Lucy. He immediately rushes at her, giving her the biggest bear hug, and in tears, he would tell her that he's never gonna let her be in danger again. She would cry and thank her dad, saying that he's the best, that he truly did save her just like he said he would. And Endu would say of course he did. But unfortunately, one person who we know very well would have ended up losing their life. A bunch of heroes, but the main one would be Lady Nagant, who unfortunately ended up dying in the crossfire. And after a couple of months, like I said, Xehther would finally be hanging out with Luna once everything died down. Xehther would have been questioned for about 2 weeks and even thrown into a prison cell, but a bunch of people would have outraged, saying that he did nothing wrong and that all that bloodshed wasn't on his hand. So he would be released, and ultimately he would be told that he's able to become a hero way earlier than anybody else ever has. She would then ask him a question as they're both swinging on the swings and just looking up at the sunset. She asks, "Why have you never gone back and maybe talked to your parents? You have to at least wonder about them, right?" Xehther stares into the sky and says, "Honestly, I've always thought about it, but I've never really had the courage. I guess I'm just not as cool as I think I am. But now's a better time than ever." So he would finally track them down using the records that he has access to, and he would end up pulling up on them, making his way outside of their house, pulling up in a Camaro as he pretty much knocks on the door, and the person who opens it would be Gabriel. Xehther would immediately let him have it, saying, "Hey, it's your lost son. So, looks like I turned out pretty well, huh? I ended up taking out the hero commission. I ended up growing up to be the best version of myself. I have a beautiful girlfriend. I'm a pro hero. I did everything right. And you just sold me like I was nothing. He lets them have it and gives them a big long speech about how he didn't need them and all that stuff. Afterwards, Gabriel would say, Inko, come here. Or sorry, not Inko, but he would say, Lucy, come here. And she would immediately come over, looking at the door as two kids would come up behind her, and she would cry like never before, hugging Xehther, saying that she's so sorry she sold them. They go inside to talk with them, and eventually they end up pretty much saying that what they did was the worst mistake of their lives. They wish they never did it, and they've been filled with so much regret ever since that day. They know that he lived a hard life, and even though they did it because they thought he was going to live an easy life, now they regret it even more. But Xehther would stop them and say that he's actually grateful to them because in a way, they gave him the chance to become the man he is today. He would leave and he would finally have a clear conscience. He finally feels great, and that's all that matters. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where What If Xehther Was an MHA officially ends. Now, I've been working on this story for about the last 2 weeks, patiently recording a single little part of this story every other day until finally I ended up getting the full 2 hours of this thing. So please, boys, leave a like on this video for all the hard work and scripting that I did. This story changed a whole lot from the original if you guys have seen it. And for those of you that did watch the original, you realize that. Now, all of you guys, I just want to remind y'all, boys, like, it'd be pretty mean if you got to the end of this story and you don't leave a like. Like, bro, it's my birthday, you know, like it's my birthday, you know. Do me one favor and leave a like on this video. That's all I ask. Just, that's my birthday gift. And maybe wish me happy birthday down in the comments. But, you know, anyways, I'm not gonna beg, you know, or maybe I will. But anyways, no, that's it. Seriously, I absolutely enjoyed making this story, and I had a ton of help. My girlfriend cameoed in it, obviously. You know, that was super fun and exciting. I had a bunch of art made for this video by the artist Akari. You can find her links down below on Instagram. And I just honestly had a bunch of inspiration from Marvel, DC Comics, and everything in the middle that you guys could think of. It was just an incredible story to write, and I'm truly grateful that I get to make something like this and people are actually going to care about what my original character would be like. That said, though, ladies and gentlemen, I love each and every single one of you guys, and remember, God loves you. Peace.